21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
I don't know if you know, but actually earlier today was we were named, or me and my co-founders and Indico were named Forbes 30 under 30. So we can
I did not know. Wow, congratulations.
Yes, yeah, so that dropped like 2 hours ago. So thank you.
Where are you situated, by the way?
Right now, I'm right outside of Boston. In Somerville,
nice, Boston, nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's
very. I like it.
So why Boston? Are you born in Boston? Did you move to Boston?
I came out here for school. I was born actually in LA on the other side of the country. And I think like every 18-year-old, right, I wanted to get as far away from home as possible. So I moved to the opposite side of the country. And I really fell in love with it out here. I think one of the things that really feels good to me about Boston is that in the US, there's not a lot of good public transit. Very different from Europe. And Boston happens to be one of the few cities that does have really good public transit. And that's a lot of why I settled here, honestly.
I heard that retail prices are so low in California, so low in LA and San Francisco. You can buy a house for peanuts.
That's a joke, right?
It is a joke.
I like that one. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure someone feels that way. That's why people keep buying the houses, right? But
maybe from China and Russia.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's at least worth holding on to the real estate, right? But no, I mean, I think that's the thing. I think that one of the things I really like about the US now is it used to be that, there was just this incredible focus on, really just San Francisco, maybe New York. And now you've seen, especially since the pandemic, right, this huge resurgence of sort of the second and third kind of tier cities that are not as big, but also have more manageable cost of living because people are realizing, hey, this is actually a great place to live.
And any interesting things regarding Boston?
I mean, I think Boston, obviously it's a very historical town, right?
Yes.
There's a really nice climbing scene around here, which I really appreciate. My school, Olin College of Engineering, I really appreciate that's also nearby. So I think that, there's a really strong, obviously, academic culture in Boston. And I think that while, people usually think immediately of sort of the biotech space, the biomedical space, and I mean, that's huge, right? And obviously sort of the, biotech in Boston is amazing.
Boston Dynamics. Any other big companies?
Oh, that too.
Except... Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, every big company almost has some branch in Boston, right?
Oh,
so,
really?
AWS and Google and Microsoft, right? Everyone's got an office in Boston,
Oh.
right? But it's all sort of option value, I would say.
Uh-huh.
So I would say, I don't know, I really like it. I think there's a lot of really good talent around Boston. Obviously, it's key. And what I like to say is Boston fuses all the good things about a big city and a small town, in my mind, is that you've got all the great, amenities, and it's a very, very kind of both a modern and a historic city. But also you run into people that just all over the place.
Oh,
the
that's
footprint of
wonderful.
the city is not
For
that
the
large.
States, that's amazing. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, while there are a lot of minuses about Boston, right? I think that the roads, for instance, are not laid out in a really sensible way. There's a lot of pluses and a lot of things to like about Boston as well. We're actually primarily focused on the enterprise. So, sort of the Fortune 500, banking, financial services, insurance. Companies like MetLife is an example, really large customer of ours. So we definitely work, we're about 70 people now. So we're definitely growing, but, not huge, but definitely underway now, I think, at this point. But I think, are moving further and further into the large enterprise. We're starting to realize that there's a really good resonance of our product there.
And what was the difference between you being solopreneur and being entrepreneur now with 70 plus people in your organization?
Oh gosh, I mean, what's not different, right?
Oh yeah.
No, I mean, I remember, I will say, way back in the day, right, when we were, 2 or 4 people, right, in a dorm room, right, I just remember absolutely everything was, I am literally doing this. I'm bringing it to the end, right? I'm reading securities law. I'm figuring out what documents do we have to file with, what departments, right? I'm doing the accounting, right? I'm doing the modeling, right? I'm doing the pitching. I'm doing absolutely everything. And the way that our current CEO likes to say it is, every stage, right? Every step that you take forward, it's a question of what hat am I going to take off and give to someone else? And I think that's one of the things that's really, really interesting. And there was this big change around the Series A, I would say. So as we were kind of hitting product market fit, where the most valuable thing I could do was no longer to go and actually build the thing, right? For the whole time up until that point, it's very much be a doer. There's not, a lot of folks to pick it up. So it's just, get stuff done, make progress. And it started to become much more strategic orientation, right? It was actually, interestingly, it was a lot more valuable for me to not do something and set someone up to be able to do it themselves then going forward. And I think that, that was definitely a very difficult shift for me. And I think that's probably the biggest shift.
And your guys, are they thinking as entrepreneurs as well? What's their mindset, or is it a classic organization now?
So no, it's definitely not a classic organization, right? I think that we've got our own flavor to it, right? I think something that we, I often say is like, I think making a company is about the hardest thing that you can possibly do, right? And a lot of the folks that we've got, certainly throughout our leadership position, right, they are founders, right? And they are people with both experience at very large companies, but every single one of them has been through the startup journey from, very, very early stages, right? So they have that, but, I would say that what I think Indico is really characterized is not, while some people might frame this as the entrepreneurial mindset, we're really framed by dramatically open communication, I think. So the way that we like to think about it, almost more than that, is to say that, because the people joining today, right, at 70 people, is a very just different kind of person than makes sense to join when we're 5 people, right, or 10 people, or 20 people even, right? And I would say those early people, right, that's kind of tremendously entrepreneurial, and even the people today, right, that's also entrepreneurial, but in a kind of fundamentally different way, I would argue. So the thing that has stayed constant about Indico is this notion that we don't know who the best answer has, right? Everyone is sort of the leader in their own domain for a particular, part of the platform, right? People care very much about making sure the customer has a good end experience, right? And I think that when you look at our core values, one thing that's really important to us that we really try to emphasize with everyone is this value of ownership. So the idea of, and this, I think, in a lot of ways is almost the delta between a startup and a big company, right? Is that when you see something has to get done, not jumping to, oh, great, and someone else is going to do it. Say, hey, I'm going to volunteer to be point and actually responsible for making sure this gets across the finish line. And I think really cultivating the kinds of folks that get a lot of fulfillment from that.
Who owns the pain when somebody screws up?
No, I mean, so I think that we generally collectively own the pain. I think that what we really try to say is that we do a really good job hiring, I believe, right? So I think if you go into every situation with the assumption that you've got a world-class team around you, the question that you've really got to ask when something goes wrong is, okay, let's diagnose it together, right? Let's do this group retrospective, try to figure out what happened, what went wrong. And then really importantly, try to think more about, okay, from a process perspective, what can we actually change to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? Because I think the other thing is, it's almost at every point in your journey as a company, you're, the most qualified, most excellent group of people that's going to exist at that point, because you're going to get, bigger, and, the expertise will be more diluted in the future. So it's actually kind of a really, really good time to set those processes up immediately after you stub your toe, right? It's kind of the best time to do it.
Is it agile or some other project management method?
It's our own flavor of agile.
Oh, okay.
I think kind of like everyone else, right? I think that we call it agile, and to some extent it is, but I mean, I think in practice it's pretty blended. at a small company, stuff comes up. And so our ability to really maintain a pure agile methodology, it's like not quite there. There's actually quite a high overhead, I think, in having a really pure agile methodology. And even, at our scale today, we're still not really there yet, frankly.
I'm asking because of the potential sprints you have.
Yeah, so we do have sprints. So that we've definitely taken on from the agile methodology, right? So we do try to keep things in these sprints and epics and releases, right? And we've got a pretty reasonable setup along that. But I would say that one of the challenges in building AI is that our systems are very, very interconnected. So our ability to just kind of shave off individual features, it's limited, right? Even now, and I think it's better now than it was 7 years ago. But even today, right, touching the ETL over here, it changes the models, right? It changes the UI, right? And you see this ripple effect, which makes it hard to have sort of a pure agile methodology.
Can you even have VAs, or you can only have full-time employees, or what's the organizational model?
Yeah, so we primarily for like the core platform, because it's very tricky, right?
It is. That's the reason why I'm asking so much questions.
Exactly.
About organization.
Yeah. So we don't have that on the actual engineering side, right? Because honestly, even getting actually the mentality we've even taken on internally is that the stuff that we're doing is weird enough that it's very rare to find someone that's got a lot of experience in the thing that we're doing. Even folks with like AI experience, we're working on like a weird little offshoot of AI. So we instead optimize very much for like someone who's really interested, someone who's very hungry, and someone who are confident is going to get up to speed, in 3 to 6 months and be really excited about that journey. Because, even like, and then that's like a very, very, competent developer we're starting with. We do that. We do have a data labeling team that, that's got more part-time folks, but even still then it's kind of a long-term relationship because we've got sort of a special way of doing things. I'd say we're always looking for places where we can kind of rely on third parties to do portions of it. But, we usually have to be, I guess the way that we do it is it's sort of very leadership driven because the vast majority of our work is not a good fit. It's more like we find, oh, hey, this is a good fit. Actually, this is like a nice, sequestered piece of work. We could do that. And we could have, an agreement for that. And then we'll kind of really proactively find someone for that engagement. So we've got someone on UX, for instance, like a really important and impactful UX cycle. And then we've also got a couple of folks on sort of customer ops, right?
What's your biggest obstacle or obstacles for growth? Lifeware, software, hardware, money?
Yeah, so actually, I think thankfully, money is not really our issue right now. Always, if you give me 100 developers, right, like we can do a lot of good stuff with 100 developers, right? But I would say it's not really the limiting factor for us right now. I think the hardest thing for us, and I think this is true for a lot of companies, is really getting the sales process like locked down. Right. It's a very new product. It's kind of a new way of selling. And what we're finding is that while we've had, some success selling in a more traditional way.
Is it a consultative sales or what kind of sales?
It's, I'll say it's a highly educational sales process, right? So it's not very services heavy, right? So we're not kind of bundling a lot of pro serve in with these, but we are having to educate the customers often quite a lot on just, we're in a very frothy space. There's a lot of different competitors or folks that appear to be competitors often at first, but aren't actually competitors because it's reasonably confusing. So a lot of what we have to help customers just understand is how do you even evaluate these vendors? How do you understand what's actually a fit for your use case and how do you tell? Because believe it or not, the most common outcome of a bake-off where we didn't really help someone, understand how to run a good bake-off is no decision, right? Which is crazy if you think about it, right? Because if you've constructed a good bake-off, you should have a decision, even if it's not us. Our kind of point of view is, let's at least help you make, get to a real decision.
Okay, Slater, now about you.
Okay,
Business journey, life journey per se, ups and downs, pitfalls.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's quite a lot. Well, here I'll start with Indico and maybe sort of how I got into all this mess. And I'll say, sort of heading into college, right, I was very much not the sort of person I think that, certainly I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur, right? When I went into undergrad, I had never owned my own computer. I thought I was going to be a chemical engineer, and I believed that entrepreneurship was a euphemism for unemployment, and I thought that's all that it meant. Because I grew up in LA, and there's no entrepreneurs in LA really at all. So I came over to Boston, right, and I came to school, and I realized a few things pretty quickly. A is that while I love chemistry, the career path of chemical engineering was not really exciting to me. It was a lot of school and a lot of probably working on oil rigs for long periods of time. So I'm like, thanks, but no thanks, right? And I was actually lucky enough to, there's a mandatory software class you have to take your first semester at school. And I absolutely loved it. It was love at first sight. And from about that point forward, from the time I picked up this Java book, I coded an average of 12 hours a day for the next, 2.5, 3 years. So that was just how much, and it was not even so much that was required by my classes. I actually was taking very few, nominally programming courses. But the way my school works is everything is project-based. So I found a way to sort of empower everything I was doing with my programming. I found a way to kind of twist the classes to give me an excuse to code more, which, I loved. So, fast forward a little bit, as all kind of young, hungry programmers do, you encounter machine learning as this really cool space, right? You've heard about AI and you're like, all right, great, maybe I can poke into that. And I sort of fell backwards into an AI project at my first internship at Pearson. And I was lucky enough to get, sort of a very good result and hit a state of the art on a particular problem. I'm like, this is great. I felt really, really good with my, very, very traditional ML techniques. This was not deep learning or anything. And actually, I was feeling so good when I came back for my sophomore year. I sat down with one of my professors and I said, and this is 2012, by the way, I said, the war is over, deep learning lost, right? And I was completely certain, right, in this kind of point of view. And in 2012, that was not actually a particularly strange point of view to have. And then I started because it had not shown any results, right? I think that people see today deep learning as all the rage and everyone uses it for everything, right? But they forget that when you go back to 2012, there were really 3 universities in the world that were doing significant research into deep learning because everyone else had written it off, really. And I'm sure there's some asterisks to that, some grad students, but the amount of research that you saw going into this field even 10 years ago was, it was almost non-existent.
Can you compare and then continue with your journey? So back then and now, regarding voice recognition or some other things that we normal people understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most shocking examples I can use is ImageNet. And so this is a very classic test for image recognition. So the idea is we have 1,000 images in 1,000 classes, everything you can think of: planes, trains, cars, 70 different dog breeds, right? So it's just supposed to be this very, very broad, very generic image recognition task, right? And humans are about, there's a lot of different ways to measure it, but for, some key metrics, humans are about 95% accurate. And when this was originally made in 2009, I think was the first public year, this was supposed to be sort of a centuries long challenge, right? Something that we would never ever accomplish, right? That once we had, gotten to this human level of efficacy, we would have solved, computer vision. And, for a couple of years, it certainly seemed that way. We didn't use deep learning, and it was sort of this very, very kind of incremental, all right, chipping away, but still, way, way, way worse than humans. And then 2012, people kind of jokingly call it the shot heard around the world, the AlexNet paper, which is now maybe one of the most widely cited papers ever in, any field, right? But certainly, I believe the most cited paper in machine learning was this entry to ImageNet that resulted in just an absolutely dramatic, insane improvement in the efficacy. It was like a halving of the error rate. And in fact, the improvement was so dramatic, and this is always how science works, right? Is the initial breakthrough is really interesting, but it's actually the stuff after that that is really impactful. And the rate of advancement from that point forward, and that was 2012 when AlexNet was released, that by 2017, I believe, we were so good at the ImageNet problem that the creators of ImageNet actually said, okay, this is no longer useful. We have solved this problem. Right. And that was 100% deep learning. Right. And that was basically what happened, was that deep learning was so radically effective that really in a couple of years, this problem that was supposed to be, decades or even a century of work was solved. And now, of course, that it turns out that doesn't actually mean that we've solved, AI in any kind of meaningful way. It's just sort of highlighted that we've got that much more to go. But you see this sort of across these fields, right? You see that in speech recognition, right? You see that in natural language processing. You see it in computer vision, right? Problems that we did not think we would see solved in our lifetimes are now the building blocks of new systems where we're, making significant strides towards more significant intelligence than we were even imagining a couple of years ago.
Let's go back to your 2012 and continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you ever heard of Kaggle?
No.
So Kaggle is this crowdsourced data science competition. So the idea is that companies come, they upload their data sets, right? And whoever gets the best accuracy wins some cash prize. So me and Alec Radford, my co-founder, we started doing these Kaggle competitions together. And this was really how I became convinced of deep learning. This is how I learned that I was wrong. For the first 6 months or so that we were competing together, these traditional techniques, they were working really, really well. Alec was still, thinking a lot about deep learning, right? He was working on these techniques. And I'm like, all right, that's kind of cute, but, I'll be doing the real work over here. But the thing was that after the first 6 months, I never made another winning submission again, right? The traditional techniques, we got to see in this very, very tangible way when deep learning really came out ahead, as we learned to use these techniques really productively. And, when it went from, okay, it's very difficult now to use these techniques, we don't know where they're effective and where they're not, to now where, I might argue that in almost every domain in machine learning, these deep learning techniques are so much more effective than traditional techniques that you really, have to be using them in some capacity in your system, if accuracy and efficacy are important, even from just a responsibility perspective. After I was convinced of this deep learning technology, right, I decided it was time to switch horses, right? And we started asking ourselves this question, okay, we're convinced with the promise of this technology, we've sort of seen what is possible here. What is now preventing people from actually effectively making use of that technology? And that really was the genesis of Indico, right? And it was really quite a bold statement. There we were, sophomores, juniors, an undergraduate, in arguably one of the hardest areas of software that exists, saying, hey, not only are we going to work in this field, but we're going to meaningfully advance the state of the art and do it in a way that is responsible. And I would say that we were tremendously successful for that. Right. I say that the first iteration of Indico, we redefined the way that developers access, these machine learning APIs. we really set a new standard for how usable these products should be. And then in Indico V2, we really and that's when we brought on CEO Tom Wild and I stepped to the CTO role. That was really when we shifted over towards the enterprise and started saying, okay, we can actually be even bolder with our vision, make this accessible even to non-technical people, sort of the citizen data scientist. And the rest is history. And I think that was the shift that really, really kind of propelled us towards success.
And was it a good history, positive one?
I learned a lot. There's a lot of positives to it. But I mean, it was tough, right? I mean, we did have to pivot. Our first business model didn't work. We had to recap the company. And while, again, there were a lot of successes, I think we built a lot of really amazing technology, right? We punched really high above our weight class for a startup like we were. We were too early to an industry, frankly, right? And I think that was a bit tough, right? Is now our industry is early, right? 7-8 years ago when we were getting started, it was embryonic.
Do you have any reference point when speaking about your company or some other companies?
Definitely. So I think that the best analogy I can use for AI, and I think this is something that people get wrong often, right? Is AI is not some objective, independent arbiter of truth, right? It's very much not like that. So actually, a better analogy for AI is a mirror. But it's not a perfect mirror. It's sort of like a mirror with 100 different pockmarks all across the surface, right? And the thing is, you're going to shine a light at it. You're going to show it something, and that's something you show it. That's data. That's your historic data. Us as humans, whatever you've been doing here historically, that's what you're showing to the mirror, and it's going to shine it back at you. And it's mostly going to be right. It's mostly going to reflect whatever you gave it. But there's going to be gaps, right? There's going to be pieces that it sort of ignores. There's going to be pieces that it magnifies a little bit, right? So it's a little bit imperfect as it shines back. But it is first and foremost a reflection of what we give it, not some independent arbiter that will kind of solve our problems for us. And I think that's something, especially, if we talk about kind of bias in AI, which is a really important and relevant topic, something that people often miss is that actually the first step and the most important step is effectively defining in human terms, right? Even put AI to the side for a second, what does something that's unbiased look like? That's a very hard discussion to have, right? But once we do that, actually, it's not too difficult a thing to build an AI that actually operates effectively. It just turns out that coming up with that initial definition, right, or even recognizing that, hey, maybe our historic data is biased, right, and asking that question, okay, how do we fix it? What would it mean to fix it, right? So I think that then becomes the more interesting and difficult question.
Can we continue with that topic? And if you can share any concrete business problem, issue that you can, your system.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I'll use the very public example of the Amazon resume reviewer, right? Because I think it's a perfect example and it's public and people can kind of look up the details if they want to know more. So in 2018, I want to say, Amazon came out and said, okay, everyone, we're turning off our AI-powered resume reviewer. And everyone's sort of like, wait, you had an AI-powered resume reviewer, right? And the story there is actually very interesting because, Amazon reasonably, they wanted to speed up the efficiency with which they review resumes. And this is really on the initial screen. So you send a resume into, their web form or whatever, and do you get a call back or not? So obviously it's important. These are employment decisions being made. And they just trained it on their historic data on did we reach out to this person or not? And very quickly, actually, because this was now in a place where they were now measuring the outcomes, they started realizing that it was, highly, highly biased, right? And the specific bias that they picked up on was this, really extreme gender bias, right? And they really could not get this thing to say it was okay to let women through the hiring pipeline. They're like, this is weird. So what Amazon decides to do, and I think this is where the story gets really interesting, is they decide, okay, the AI is broken. right? And that's, with the way that a lot of people think about it, that's a really reasonable assumption. So they get, a whole bunch of the world's top PhDs, right? And they say, fix it, fix our AI, make it better. And they frame it as a modeling problem, as a machine learning problem. And so, this team, they dig deep into, like what's going on in the model, what could we possibly do to fix it? They find these weird quirks. It's just like, because of the random sample we took, everyone from Smith College, and Smith College is a very, very good, sort of all girls school, or, women's college, I should say, in the United States. But, one quirk of the model was it would just flat out reject anyone from Smith College. And that's, a little bit what I'm talking about with the little, pockmarks on the mirror, right? It's these little just random things that they're probably small in terms of the whole river of data that Amazon has looked through. It's maybe 0.1% of the applicants are from Smith, but, obviously that's bad, both for Amazon and obviously for folks from Smith College. And it's pretty impactful. But then what happens is, for 2 years, basically, these PhDs work on the system and they whack on it, and, they're tweaking every hyperparameter they can think of. And their fundamental conclusion is this problem is not solvable. Right. And so they come back and they say, look, our conclusion is that there's no amount of tweaking that we can do to this model that is going to make it not biased. We need non-biased data and a definition of what it means for our data to be non-biased in order to make progress. And Amazon says, okay, that's very interesting. And then this leads us to the actual press release, where they have now two options, right? They can either, keep measuring their system, right, and continue trying to improve it over time, or they can turn the AI off, right? They can go back to the old system where they haven't actually solved any of the issues with bias, right? But they're no longer measuring it. And so there's no longer the onus to solve it. And so that's really what they ended up doing, right? And I think that's what a lot of people end up doing, right? Is that AI is sort of this mirror, and they say, hey, we want to use it on our resume process. And when it shines back to you, it's got its own imperfections, but also we might not be very happy with what we see. And, I think it's very easy in that case to blame the mirror, right? Blame the AI, be like, oh, why are you making these wrong decisions? When really, you're the one that did that, right? It's just the mirror. And so that's, I think kind of a classic case where, and then in Amazon's case, right, again, the way they solved it was even to break the mirror, right? And they're like, okay, we're not actually going to fix our problem. We're just going to break the mirror because then we don't have to think about it.
What about fake mirrors? I mean, that's one of the fake is one of the buzzwords of 2021 and.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things that's really worth noting here. So Indico was actually, we were the authors on the DC GAN paper, which was one of the very first kind of realistic fake articles out there, for building these fake faces and images and things along those lines. And I think this is. I think this is one of the biggest, most real threats out there. I think that for now, our ability to distinguish fakes from, reality, actually, humans are pretty bad at this, it turns out, unless you train them. Models are significantly better at it. But it's still difficult to use these techniques, right? It's difficult to train them in a realistic way and use them effectively and productively. There's still a lot of manual configuration and manual oversight that's required. But in practice, what that means is just that the expense is really high. And that actually makes things a little bit scarier, because it means that the folks that you see kind of dipping their toe into this technology are state actors. So, for instance, and not a lot of people know this, but we've actually already seen the first examples of deep fakes being used in sort of government, cyber warfare sounds a little bit dramatic, right? But at least, information warfare, right? Where I want to say it was there was a fake profile that was reputed to, like verify the Hunter Biden laptop or something along those lines. And the thing was just like fake from top to bottom, right? It was a fake person from a fake university, an image of a face that never existed, that was generated actually, I believe, by DCGAN. And it, it was probably in the vast river of stuff, that individual piece of misinformation was not that impactful. But it starts to make you wonder, right, is, in a world where people are not going to run these articles through highly sophisticated AI algorithms to check whether or not they're real. Right. They're just not. Right. They're going to pick the thing that looks like what they want it to look like. And those things are getting, again, really, really impressive. And I think that while they are out of the reach of most folks, they're not out of the reach of state actors. In fact, for state actors, they're quite accessible. And, I think the technology is not quite at a place where it's, an existential threat. But I don't know. I think it is getting close. I think that that's one of the biggest, short-term threats. That and sort of programmatic bias, I think, are some of the most imminent threats that AI really poses.
We all speak about social or political or geopolitical repercussions. What about business? Negative repercussions regarding fake mirrors on business as well?
So I think that, when I look at the biggest issue with businesses right now, it's the really, really low success rate of AI projects, right? So I would say that, today, deep fakes, it's not a real threat to most businesses, right? I would say that, the adoption of AI is still really, really incomplete. I would say that, at some point in the future, right, that might change, but that's not really the top issue for them. Right now, the top issue, in my estimation at least, is really a skills gap. Is that when you look at the success rate of AI projects going into production and then achieving the results that people believed they would achieve, it's something like 11% of projects actually get all the way through that process after someone starts working on them. 11%, right, which is just awful. It's just like abysmal. And a lot of the problem is actually kind of counterintuitive, is because people believe that AI is sort of so easy because there's so much technology out there now, right? People sort of jump in without really devoting the necessary resources, then it's no wonder that it fails, right? But I think that skills gap, right, and that recognition that, yes, there are people, and that the use cases are valuable enough individually that 11% pays for, the 90% that fail. So it's still worth it for them, which is why everyone is still doing it. But I think that people are not necessarily recognizing that, you don't have to have a failure rate that is that high. So for us, for instance, and, we can, we push our customers often pretty hard to say, hey, look, you framed this incorrectly. It's actually going to take you a little bit more work if you want to test these correctly. But then on the flip side, we have a success rate of 97%, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate, especially on the larger business side, is that, you need more skills, right? Getting a couple of good partners plugged in actually can have a dramatically outsized impact. And, I think that a lot of people they don't measure or hold themselves accountable for, is this getting into production, right? Is this delivering the ROI that we thought it was going to deliver, right? How long is it taking to get into production? Just because AI is so cool, I think, people can be really loose with that. And I think that we really push people, don't be loose with that, be really, really clear, because, we want people to be successful, and, we want folks that, buy our solution to get promoted.
I mean, 97%, what's the industry standard?
11%.
Really? That 11%, and you are on 97.
Yeah. Those are comparable numbers.
Oh my God.
And that's why we got into this business, frankly, and we had to fail a lot before we figured out how to do this. But now, it's a space that most people think has been around for 3 years or something. For most people, this space showed up when Bird has arrived, but we've been doing this for 8 years. So, we've gotten pretty good at doing it right. thrilled to say that we actually offer a free trial. We're one of the very few people in the industry to do this. So you can actually go to indicodata.ai right now. You can play with an interactive demo live, even if you don't have your own documents or your own AI, and you can see it working again live. And you can sign up for a more detailed trial where you'll actually get access to all of our production models. You'll get to see sort of our whole open source community. You can follow me at slater.website. And I actually was just named, as we mentioned at the start of the podcast, the Forbes 30 Under 30. So you can read more about us in that press.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.